Kelly Reilly just confirmed that Beth Dutton went to Monica's funeral, that it happened before Dutton Ranch Season 1 even started. And then 9 episodes passed without a single mention of it. What does it cost Beth to watch her brother bury his wife and then drive away to start over in Texas? Why did the show spend an entire season building a new life around 2 people who are clearly carrying something they haven't talked about yet? And what does Kelly Reilly mean when she calls that silence a missed opportunity? Let's break down the most emotionally loaded thread heading into Season 2. Before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you considered subscribing. We cover every development in Dutton Ranch and the Yellowstone franchise the moment it drops, and this thread has been sitting underneath the whole season without anyone talking about it. Okay, let's establish the full timeline, because this particular wound only makes sense if you understand how many things were happening to Beth and Rip at the same exact time. Monica Dutton, played by Kelsey Asbill, was a Yellowstone main cast member from the very beginning of the show. She was Kayce's wife, Tate's mother, the human center of a show that often threatened to become purely about power and violence. And she died off-screen. Between the Yellowstone series finale and the Marshals series premiere, Monica was revealed to have died of cancer. Not in a scene, not with her family around her. Just gone by the time Marshals began, with Kayce rebuilding his life around a loss the audience was told about rather than shown. Now here's what Kelly Reilly confirmed in her post-finale interview with TV Insider. Dutton Ranch Season 1 takes place after Monica's death. Reilly described it plainly. She said she imagines Beth and Rip had gone to Monica's funeral before their story started, that there had been some connection between the 2 families during that period, and that Dutton Ranch Season 1 begins after all of that had already happened, which means the fire that destroyed Beth and Rip's Montana ranch, the desperate decision to buy the Edwards property in Rio Paloma, the first day Carter set foot in South Texas, all of it came after Beth had already stood at her sister-in-law's graveside, and then Season 1 never mentioned any of it. Not Monica, not the funeral, not Kayce, not what that grief cost Beth in the weeks and months between losing someone her brother loved and losing the physical home she'd built in Montana. 9 episodes, 0 acknowledgement. Reilly called it herself in the TV Insider interview, a missed opportunity. She didn't soften it. She didn't frame it as a deliberate creative choice. She said it was a gap, something she could see clearly now, and something Season 2 has the chance to go back and fix. Now here's what makes that framing so significant. Reilly isn't just an actress talking about a scene she wishes existed. She's someone with full knowledge of where the character's head is at every moment of this show. When she says Beth went to that funeral, she's describing a moment that defined Beth's emotional baseline for everything that happened in Season 1. Beth arrived in Texas already grieving, not just for Montana, not just for the home the fire took, but for the version of her family that existed before Monica got sick, before Kayce had to watch his wife die, before Tate had to grow up without his mother. And the show spent 9 episodes building a cattle war, a fentanyl smuggling operation, a succession battle, and a kidnapping without ever once pausing to acknowledge that Beth was carrying all of that underneath everything else. Cole Hauser described the entire Season 1 approach deliberately. He said the goal was to show these characters from nothing, watching them stumble, always on their back foot for the first time. But what makes it land harder is what he said about Season 2. He said he'd love to see Kayce and Rip actually get along, have a scene where they're genuinely happy together. Not tense, not navigating a crisis. Just 2 men who love the same people finally being in the same room without something being on fire. That's not a casual wish for a fun crossover moment. That's an actor describing what he knows is being withheld. Because Kayce and Rip have never had that scene. In Yellowstone, their relationship was always mediated by crises, by John Dutton's authority, by Beth's need to be the one who controlled everything around her. A scene where Rip and Kayce are simply present together, in the aftermath of loss, is something this universe has never given us. Season 2 is being positioned as the chance to finally deliver it. Here's the re-hook, because I think there's a detail in Reilly's framing that nobody's fully sat with yet. She said, our story started after that. After the funeral, after the connection that happened between Beth and Kayce in that grief. Which means Season 1 of Dutton Ranch has been operating with an emotional backstory the audience was never given access to. Beth has been running around Rio Paloma, fighting Beulah Jackson and navigating a cartel operation while carrying a grief that the show chose to begin after instead of during. That choice has a cost. Every time Beth reacted to something in season 1, every time she made a decision about Carter or the ranch or her relationship with Rip, she was doing it as someone who had recently stood at her sister-in-law's funeral and then driven away without the audience seeing any of that land. Season 2 has to reckon with that gap. Reilly said it directly. She described season 2 as the opportunity to go back and do certain things differently, to take care of things that needed to be fixed. And she said this specifically in response to a question about Monica's death and the absence of any acknowledgement between Beth and Kayce. That's not a general comment about production quality. That's an actress telling you what's on the list. Kelly Reilly also confirmed that Montana will always be home for Beth and Rip, but she was equally clear that they cannot go back. They have nothing there. No money, no livelihood. The fire took the physical home. Monica's death and everything Kayce is carrying in its aftermath is the emotional home that's also been lost. Season 2 begins with Beth and Rip fighting a cartel to save Carter. But the thread underneath that fight, the thing Reilly is quietly telling us season 2 is also about, is two siblings finally being in the same room to account for what they've each been carrying since a funeral that happened before the show started. So here's where season 2 stands heading into production. Dutton Ranch season 2 is confirmed with the full main cast returning. Benjamin Cavell is the new showrunner, bringing a fresh creative perspective to a show that both its stars believe has a very clear list of things to deepen and expand. Reilly described season 2 as feeling much more like Ed Harris's show, with Beth, Rip, Beulah, and Everett sharing equal weight in the story, and with Texas finally seeing what these characters can do when they're back on offense. Season 2 is expected in mid to late 2027. Marshals season 2 premieres this fall 2026, with Tate in Texas, Kayce closing in, and a crossover that both shows appear to be actively building toward. Which means Beth and Kayce could be in the same room again sometime in the next 12 to 18 months of real time. And the first thing they'll have to navigate is everything they didn't say at Monica's funeral. So tell me what you think. Does season 2 actually show us what happened between Beth and Kayce in that grief period? And is the crossover's emotional center not Carter and Tate at all, but a brother and sister who haven't looked each other in the eye since the worst thing happened? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from everyone who's been waiting for this thread to be addressed. And if you want every update the moment season 2 news drops, go ahead and subscribe. I'd really appreciate having you here for it. See you when the next piece of this story lands.